So, what were you doing when you were 15 years old? At 15, Justin Bieber had just released his first song, which became certified platinum in the United States. The current Dalai Lama, at 15 years of age, found himself to be the undisputed leader of 6 million people. When I was 15 years old, I was just daydreaming about the day my braces would finally come off and that cute boy in physics would finally ask me out. Children were doing different things at 15 years of age. I'm sure that time brings back memories for you too, of being vulnerable, powerful, or afraid. This is Mohamed Ahmed Ismail. He's 15 years old. He lives in a remand center, a glorified prison in Iraq. Last August, Mohamed was found with a suicide belt wrapped around his waist. He had been instructed by the terrorist organization, Islamic State, to blow himself up outside a football stadium. His father and his uncle were both members of the same group. His other 15-year-old cousin blew himself up in a nearly identical mission not very far away. Despite being trained for months, both militarily and in religious terms, and despite being told by the Islamic State that if he would go through with this mission, Mohamed would die and become a martyr, when the time came to push the button, something in Mohamed resisted, and he found he couldn't do it. That's when security authorities detained him. In the remand center where Mohamed lives, he often gathers together other child inmates and leads them in prayer, lecturing them on the radical Islam he learned in his childhood spent in the Islamic State. There is currently no rehabilitation program at the center to address Mohamed's radicalization. There is no relief from the constant mental torture that he faces every single day. Sadly, Mohamed is not the only child in this situation. In 2015 alone, the Islamic State abducted between 800 to 900 children from the ages of 9 to 15 in Mosul in Iraq. This Yazidi boy, abducted from Sinjar in Iraq and often seen playing with guns and training militarily in Islamic State propaganda videos, is one of them. All too often, these children are used as human shields, as spies, as guards, as messengers, and as martyrs. So here are some questions for you. How much choice do Mohamed and other children have? Why should we care? And if we do care, what can we do about it? My name is Nikita Malik. I've spent my career researching the use of children by terrorist organizations, particularly by Islamic State. I've advised governments around the world about potential policy solutions to these issues. I would like to provide some insight to you today. So let's start with question 1. How much choice did Mohamed have when he found himself with a suicide belt around his waist when he was told to become a martyr? For Mohamed and other child soldiers like him, the journey begins in the classroom. However, this classroom is not your ordinary classroom. The Islamic State has a systematic process to win the hearts and minds of the next generation of jihadists. They see each child as a blank slate where any idea, however violent or extreme, can be passed. History textbooks, for example, only teach Islamic history and nothing else. Physical education classes are renamed jihadist training and focus on the assembly, use, and storage of light weapons. If a child refuses to conform, they don't get your regular timeout or detention, Rather, these children are flogged, tortured, and raped. The prolonged exposure and normalization of violence that these children experience mean that concepts such as killing yourself to become a martyr become completely normalized. It also means that they suffer from severe mental, physical, and cognitive difficulties later on. Because, as I'm sure we all know, children are less likely to question authority. So the second question, why should we care? Unfortunately, the status quo is such that Mohamed and other children like him are likely to spend their entire lives in detention, often in solitary confinement. The current generation of fighters in Islamic State see children as better and more lethal fighters than themselves. This is because, rather than converting to a radical ideology, these children are born and indoctrinated into extreme values. As the Islamic State loses territory in Iraq and Syria, it is likely that even more children will be detained. For the children who went from the UK, Europe, and beyond, many of them are likely to return. Those who are unable to return will use smuggling networks to do so. Unless we effectively find and demobilize these children, they also present a security threat. So how then do we build bridges to reach these children? How do we tap into children like Mohamed's resilience to indoctrination? What can we do about it? The essence of any solution is to create a sense of normality for these children. At the first instance, this will involve a deep and thorough risk assessment, because each child and each case will be unique. Traditional approaches have focused on 3 steps: DDR, demobilization, disarmament, and reintegration. However, case studies we have researched historically, which look at children who have exited the Taliban in Afghanistan and Pakistan, for example, find that children continue to face trauma, even when they have re-engaged with civilian life. This can manifest itself in regressing, reenacting violence, or becoming increasingly antisocial and disengaged. Therefore, we need to add to these DDR approaches. We need to add elements of de-radicalization and re-education in order to counter the years of brainwashing about martyrdom that these children would have experienced and the impact of violence that would have affected them. Religious scholars, former extremists, practitioners, and researchers all have a remarkable role to play in informing any of these approaches. This is all new. The space is relatively innovative. We can also rely on things like sports therapy, the use of play, the use of storytelling, and rituals in order to give back these children some semblance of their childhood. What questions would we need to ask, for example, if a child was to come back to the UK from the Caliphate tomorrow? We'd need to assess, at the very least, the age of the child, whether the child voluntarily joined the group or was coerced into doing so, whether they voluntarily exited it. What about the child's family? Can they be reintegrated with them, or are they too radicalized? These are all essential questions to ask. However, while conventions and theory continue to be formed in this space, the sad reality is that Mohamed and other children like him face very little access to such approaches at all. Unless things change, the center where Mohamed and other children find themselves mean that they are likely to be subject to torture, physical and mental humiliation on a daily basis. What then do we do? The bridges to reach them. Do we build them or do we burn them? Do we heal these children or do we abandon them? In his famous book, 1984, George Orwell wrote, "Of pain you can wish only one thing, that it should stop." As a society, our collective mission should be to continue to stop the use of children, both by non-state armed groups, but especially by terrorist organizations. A childhood should be carefree, not a nightmare from which you can never wake up. Let's make sure these children aren't made prisoners of their childhood. Thank you.